To say I feel privileged to have been loved by John de Ruiter and to be his granddaughter is an understatement. To say I feel proud of the man he was and that I learned from his great character and strength is also an understatement. And I say this today on behalf of his daughter Kim, his other grandchildren Lisa, Greg, Trudy and Stephen. We feel immense sadness and loss that he's left our world, but we also feel relief, and you could even say joy, that he left this world having been living independently and on his terms. It's impossible to pay tribute to Pa completely and appropriately in just one short eulogy. There were so many layers to him, I'm sure I don't know the half of them. He lived such a long and interesting life. So I'll focus on just a few points about Pa that we, as his family, feel are indicative of the man he was and will form the foundations of our most cherished memories. Love. Love of his family, and in particular love of his girls. Pa's capacity to love was extraordinary. The reason he's so loved today is simple. It's a reflection of the love he generated, the love he gave unconditionally to so many. His huge warm hugs, his loving kisses on our foreheads, the concern for everyone else but himself, the joy he had in his family's happiness and in their success. Selfless, beautiful, limitless love. From the stories he's told us, it sounds as if that love was in his blood. His father, Hendrik de Ruiter, came to Australia from the Netherlands in 1910, aged 19. And so the story goes that he felt so madly in love with a girl called Mabel Grace that when he was on the boat to return to the Netherlands, he literally jumped off and swam to shore. He and Mabel married, and so Pa's life was about to begin. He was born at home in Darlinghurst on the 11th of November 1920 and named Jack. He was baby number 3 for Harry and Mabel, younger brother to Edna and Harry. Ilma, Dot and Lenny came along later to complete the de Ruiter family. In his early 20s, Jack, the handsome, eligible bachelor, was captivated by young Shirley Joy Henderson. Nana was one of Ilma's friends and he first saw her at a dance. Pa tells the story of her visiting their family home with Ilma on one occasion after that first time, and Pa's sisters and Mum were singing a song, "Oh Johnny, oh Johnny." They teased him all the time with that song, he hated it. Pa always talked about seeing Shirley singing louder than the rest of them on that day with a cheeky smile on her face. Following that, he says he was walking down the street one day, admiring a great pair of legs. When he looked up, it was Nana. She coyly but playfully turned and said, "Hi, Johnny," before going on her way. And so, Jack became John. And so, Shirley became Mrs. de Ruiter, the two of them marrying at St Jude's Church in Randwick in 1944. The love Nana and Pa had for one another is something I know all of his grandchildren aspire to. The love they shared, right to the end, was inspirational. Pa absolutely adored Nana, and I can honestly say that I never ever heard him say a bad word about her. They were a great team. As I said earlier, Pa loved his girls. It started with his mum and sisters, Shirley of course, then little Robin and Kim. He would speak so affectionately of his daughters and stories of them growing up. Then came along 5 grandchildren, 3 of us girls that he could spoil and nurture. Greg and Stephen, his grandsons, absolutely idolised him, from when they were small boys until the present day. Legend and hero are 2 words they have both used to describe Pa over the past couple of days. Pa's adoration of his girls, mainly Nana, set an example to Greg and Stephen about being a gentleman and respecting women. Although I do know that Stephen felt a little put out after Pa told him he'd gone down the pecking order when he married Jessica, who Pa loved so much. 2003 was the year Pa's heart was irreparably broken. It was the year he lost Nana and also lost Robin just 4 months later. Nana's battle with cancer was tough on Pa, and the way he looked after her was beautiful but heartbreaking. He insisted on keeping her home and nursing her himself for as long as possible. and this was not easy. We weren't sure Pa would survive losing her. Not only did he have to live without the love of his life and his best friend, he had to learn how to manage the house and life on his own. He'd never bought groceries, he'd never cleaned the house, he'd never cooked, and he'd never paid a bill. But he learned, and he did really well. It was the deep love he had for his family that got him through. A new phase of his life started, which began with a host of weddings of his grandchildren. And then came the greatest joy of his final years, the great-grandchildren. And not just great-grandchildren, but great-granddaughters. Yes, more girls for Pa to love and adore. I don't think Pa could quite believe he was going to be a great-grandfather. When I was pregnant with his first great-grandchild, I would come home to random gifts on my doorstep with little notes on them. He was at the hospital within the hour when he heard of Amali's birth. He was not afraid to hold a newborn, and all our bubs have felt the warmth and love of Pa's cuddles. Amali, Ava and Azara all love Pa. He was an integral part of their lives, and Amali is already asking when Pa is coming back from heaven, as she wants to see him. For our girls and for Pa's great-grandchildren yet to be born, his memory will be kept alive through the incredible stories of his life and experiences. And what a life he had. Pa lived 90 long years. In his words, a good innings. The changes he's seen in our world from 1920 to today and the depth of his experiences are mind-boggling. In Pa's day, there were sand dunes all around Bondi, as well as dairy farms. Pa apparently used to take the cows out in return for riding the horses. My husband's favourite story of Pa's is the one of him seeing the Duke ride his surfboard at Bondi for the first time. Pa and his mates couldn't believe it. They'd only ever known body surfing. As young locals, Pa and brother Harry were at Bondi Beach on Black Sunday in 1938. They were actually in the surf when the 3 freak waves hit. There was mass hysteria as people were being rescued and resuscitated. Pa and Harry lost one another and started getting anxious, looking amongst the rescued and the dead. They finally found each other. And instead of being relieved and happy that they'd found each other alive and uninjured, they were both annoyed. Why would you be worried about me? Why would you look amongst the rescued for me? I'm a strong swimmer. I'm fine. Of course I'm fine. Pa, of course, remembers Bondi Beach being surrounded by barbed wire, protecting us from the Japanese. Pa applied to the Royal Australian Air Force in 1943, but was deemed ineligible for enlistment as aircrew because he was in a reserved occupation. That occupation was a printer. Pa was top of his game, and they needed him to print propaganda for the American war effort. In Pa's day, there were no computers and no digital printing. His trade was highly revered. He had a great skill and a great eye for colour. Pa was well sought after and travelled the world as a printer, which was huge for those days. He also took Nana with him on some beautifully memorable trips. Pa's experiences weren't all historically based or virtuous. There were 2 other loves of his life, and that's golf and beer, sometimes coming hand in hand. Actually, there was a 3rd love, and that was the Roosters, which I should probably mention. Pa was extremely annoyed and frustrated when he couldn't swing a club like he used to. And at about 85, he gave it up because he just wasn't happy with his game. But beers he could still do. Pa loved a cold ale and was very social. Most of the men here have enjoyed a beer or 2, or too many, with Pa. Greg and Stephen have stories to tell, as do his grandson-in-laws, Stuart and Richard. To his newest his drop, although apparently, from the tap, it's VB. He was very particular, obviously. What makes us proud and gives us comfort today is that Pa lived and left on his terms. Pa was a man of character, a strong man, independent, dignified. He did things his way. He really hated how he was treated differently as he got older. I still laugh when I think of how annoyed he was that people kept standing up for him on the bus, and young women. Like he was an old guy, I said. At 85, Pa, I said, you are an old guy. We all know he lived alone in the Bondi apartment he and Nana bought about 30 years ago, and his final 4 weeks were full, loving and significant. Just 3 weeks ago, the family came together to celebrate his 90th birthday. It was a wonderful celebration. Pa got to meet Trudy's fiancé Ben, who he'd heard so much about. He got to see Lisa's baby bump. He saw his beloved 3 great-granddaughters causing chaos together. And the celebration was in the Bondi Road home that hosted so many memorable family celebrations when Mum and Nana were still with us. We found out later that he was actually really sick on the day, just holding it together. But in true Pa form, he didn't want to burden us with it. He wanted the celebrations to go on. I didn't think he'd be well enough the next week to attend Amali's kindy Christmas concert. Well, I should have known better. Pa was not going to miss it. There was nothing that would keep him away. And he was the proudest man there. The twinkle in his eye as Amali gave him a huge smile when she spotted him in the crowd was priceless. I wondered at the time if that sparkle in the eye was actually a tear. Only 10 days before Pa died, he walked down to the Royal to enjoy a beer, as he did every afternoon. He was known by everyone there and they loved him. He was thrilled also that night to receive a call from his grandson Greg in Canada. An infection saw him suddenly hospitalised, with his body breaking down on so many levels. Things weren't looking good, and Kim came to his bedside to spend 2 special days with him. She knew they were saying goodbye for the last time. Pa had been trying to take the oxygen mask off for days in the hospital. This was not an agitated old guy who was confused and unthinking. This was an independent, dignified man who was saying no more. There would be no nursing home or loss of independence for Pa. We let him have his wish. Only 2.5 hours after the oxygen mask came off, he slipped away, peacefully and on his own terms, with Stephen and I at his side. He was sitting up in a chair, and his last breaths were strong and defined and with purpose. He knew that was it, and it's what he wanted. He closed his eyes after his last breath and looked so peaceful. Many of us like to think that he is reunited with his beloved Shirley and, of course, his darling Robin. In fact, the song that will be played at the end of this service is the anniversary waltz sung by Al Jolson. Auntie Kim said he and Nana loved this song and would sing it to one another. When I hear it, I think about the reunion they are hopefully having in some form right now. I want to finish now with a couple of verses of My Way, popularised by Frank Sinatra. The words are just so poignant to Pa. I've loved, I've laughed and cried. I've had my fill, my share of losing. And now as tears subside, I find it all so amusing. To think I did all that, and may I say, not in a shy way, oh no, not me. I did it my way. For what is a man, what has he got? If not himself, then he has not. To say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows I took the blows and did it my way. Yes, it was my way. Pa has been described as an inspiration, a hero, a rock we turn to in challenging times. He was all these things and more, and had a zest for life unlike anyone I've known. We are privileged to have known such a man in our lives, and with this privilege comes a responsibility. A responsibility to aspire to be like this person for our children and our grandchildren. Pa, you did it your way, and you are amazing. You are so loved. You will be forever in our hearts. Thank you for loving us and for all you brought to our lives. We miss you already.